5 relationship patterns that quietly drain your peace. Buddhist wisdom. There are people who leave you exhausted after every conversation. Not because they shouted, not because they attacked you, just a conversation. And afterward, something feels heavier than before. Most people spend years trying to understand what's wrong with those people. Buddhism asks a different question. Not what's wrong with them, but what exactly happened inside you during that conversation. The people look completely different. The situations look completely different. Yet something about them feels strangely familiar. What if these 5 people have been showing you the same thing all along? Before we go further, notice honestly if any of this feels familiar. Just notice. The phone lights up. You see the name. Before you answer, something in your chest tightens. Not because anything has been said yet. Not because you know what they'll ask. Just the name. Just the light on the screen. And something in you has already begun preparing. This is the first pattern. You give because you were raised to give, because love feels like obligation, because saying no brings up something you'd rather not look at. And the giving continues. Long past when it made sense. Long past when you had anything left. Here is the only question that matters for this pattern. Why does the weight appear before they've even spoken? Notice that. Not the person. The weight. Where exactly does it live? Something in you cannot remain still until the discomfort is resolved. Not their discomfort, yours. When the exhaustion starts before the conversation does, the pattern is already visible. That is the moment to look not at them, but at what just moved inside you. Has there been someone in your life whose needs always seem to become your emergency? You don't have to name them in the comments, but notice for a moment what that felt like. You are halfway through a story, something that mattered to you. Maybe something about your week, your health, something you had been carrying. And before you finish the second sentence, they begin. That reminds me. 10 minutes later, you are listening. 20 minutes later, you are still listening. The call ends. And only after you hang up do you remember there was something you wanted to say. You never said it. This is the second pattern. And the natural response is frustration with them. Why can't they just listen? Why does it always circle back to them? But hold that frustration for a moment, because there is something else happening underneath it. Every time you begin to speak, part of you is waiting. Waiting for the moment they finally lean in. Finally ask. Finally stay with what you said just for a moment. Notice the person you are waiting for. Have they ever actually been there? Because the exhaustion is not only from the conversation. It is from the waiting. From holding an image of someone who keeps failing to appear. The mind is not disappointed by the person in front of it. It is disappointed by the person it invented, the warmer version, the more present version, the one who was supposed to be there. Notice what happens in that gap between who they actually are and who you keep expecting them to be. Something aches. Notice where that ache appears. Notice what it is still attached to. Ajahn Chah said once that if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. The letting go here is not of the relationship. It is of the version of them that has never existed anywhere except inside you. The words arrive gently. Always gently. wrapped in concern, in experience, in what sounds from a certain angle like love. Nothing loud, nothing you could easily point to. The way you've arranged your home, the choices you make with your time, the friends you keep, the food you eat, how you spent the years since you retired. Nothing is ever quite right. But here is what makes this pattern so hard to see clearly. The conversation ended at noon. At 4 in the afternoon, you're still replaying it. At 9 in the evening, you're composing a response you'll never send. At midnight, you are arguing fully, completely, with someone who isn't in the room. They are not there. But the argument is. Now ask yourself honestly, if a stranger had said those exact same words, would they still be with you tonight? Probably not. Which means the words did not stay because they were powerful. They stayed because something in you is still waiting. Waiting for that particular person in that particular voice to finally say, "You are enough." Notice what that waiting feels like. Not the words, not the person, the waiting. The criticism didn't stay because it was true. It stayed because something in you was still waiting for permission. Another emergency, another call, another problem that only you can solve, another crisis that arrived at the worst possible time. You're canceling your own plans again. Sending the text, "Sorry, something came up." You stare at the message before you press send. You already know what the something is. You step in. You give what is needed. The crisis passes. Then another arrives. And another. Until one day, something unsettling becomes visible. The crises keep changing. Your role never does. Here is where the Dharma places a question that is not comfortable. What does carrying this person's life actually give you? Because it gives something. Notice that before dismissing it. A sense of being needed. A feeling of being necessary. A role that makes you feel in some quiet way, like you matter in someone else's story. And that the holding on to that role is itself a form of holding. A Vietnamese meditation master, Venerable Vien Minh, once said it plainly. Every person has their own path of cause and effect. To carry that path for them is not compassion. It is interference. Each person's life contains its own teaching. The consequences of their choices are part of that teaching. When we absorb those consequences, we are not helping them see. We are preventing them from seeing. What if what you were protecting was not them? What if it was the version of yourself that felt necessary? True compassion is not the absence of care. It is the clarity to let someone walk their own path, even when it's difficult, while remaining genuinely present beside them. Not carrying present. There is a difference. You tell yourself you're giving freely. You tell yourself you don't need anything back. You tell yourself that gratitude doesn't matter, that you give because you care, that recognition is not the point. And then, one day they forget. One day they don't notice. One day they thank someone else for something you had quietly done first. And something tightens. Something small. Something you're almost embarrassed to name. But it is there. The giving started to feel like effort somewhere along the way. Then like obligation. Then, if the pattern continued long enough, resentment. Not dramatic resentment. Not the kind you could easily explain. just a tiredness underneath generosity that generosity was never supposed to create. Here is the question worth sitting with honestly. When did the ledger open? Because it opened. Not because of them. They may have never known it existed. But at some point, the giving began keeping records. Something small was expected in return. Just acknowledgement. Just to have it registered. Just for the giving to mean something to the person who received it. The resentment didn't begin when they failed to appreciate you. It began the moment the ledger was opened. Think of a time you gave something fully, freely, with nothing expected in return. Notice how that felt compared to this. That difference is worth sitting with. The phone call was different. The conversation was different. The criticism was different. The crisis was different. The resentment was different. The people were different. But look more carefully. Before the chest tightened, something was already moving. Before the disappointment, there was already an expectation. Before the criticism lingered, there was already a need for permission. Before the burden appeared, there was already a self that needed to be needed. Before the resentment, there was already a bargain. The people were different. The situations were different. But every time, the mind arrived carrying something. Notice that. 5 patterns. 5 people, 1 door. The tightening before the call. The aching when the conversation moves away. The voice at midnight. The role you couldn't put down. The ledger you didn't know you were keeping. None of these are problems to fix. They are the mind's own movements, made visible by the people who happened to be there when they appeared. A Vietnamese meditation master once said, "Seeing things as they truly are, that is the beginning of freedom." Not freedom from difficult people. Freedom from the holding that was happening without your knowing. Maybe none of these people change. Maybe the phone lights up tomorrow with the same name. Maybe the conversation circles back to them again. Maybe the words arrive the same way they always have. But if you can see clearly what happens inside you when they do, something has already changed. If something here opened a door, there is more on this channel and it goes deeper. Stay close.